who is just an egregiously awful human being. Linda Sarsour is the Women's March organizer, and the left loves her. Bernie Sanders tweeted out that he loved her and he wanted her support. President Obama gave her an Agents of Change award at the White House. So I want to give you a little bit of background about Linda Sarsour before we play the clip that's got everybody buzzing, right? So she actually said on Sunday, she called for a jihad against Trump, right? She used that word. And we'll talk about whether she meant that peacefully or non-peacefully. But first, I think we need to set the stage for who Linda Sarsour is, because the left keeps saying, well, don't take that quote out of context. Okay, well, I don't want to take the quote out of context, so I'll play it in context and explain it. But I also don't want to take Linda Sarsour out of context, okay? She's not just some rando who used the word jihad to mean a moderate Muslim struggle within themselves for greater spirituality, okay? She's not Dr. Zuhdi Jasser. I mean, she's not any of these people. She is a very, very extreme person. For example, here's what she tweeted about Ayaan Hirsi Ali. Ayaan Hirsi Ali is a victim of female genital mutilation at the hands of Muslims. She is now an atheist, and she speaks out against radical Islamism. And Linda Sarsour tweeted out about her, and Brigitte Gabriel, another ex-Muslim. Brigitte Gabriel equals Ayaan Hirsi Ali. She's asking for an ass whipping. I wish I could take their vaginas away. They don't deserve to be women. This is Linda Sarsour, the leader of the Women's March, right? So she's a feminist icon. Okay, this is what she tweeted about the Honor Diaries, which was a movie about honor killings and how they are now endemic in parts of the Muslim world. She didn't like that, so she tweeted, Honor Diaries is hashtag Dishonor Diaries because it's disingenuous when it's funded by representatives and organizations labeled hate groups. So she can't argue with any of the content. She's just going to label anybody who funds a movie about honor killings a hate group. Okay, here's a tweet about Sharia law. Linda Sarsour is a big fan of Sharia law. Here's what she had to say about Sharia law. And I'm not talking about Sharia law like the internal governance of the Muslim community when you have a financial dispute and you and your fellow Muslims go to like an Islamic court. We have that in Judaism too. It's called Beit Din. It's not that big a deal, right? It's an ecclesiastical court. But that's not what she's talking about. She's talking about the governance of a country by Islamic law, including areas, including criminal law. She says, you'll know when you're living under Sharia law if suddenly all your loans and credit cards become interest-free. Sounds nice, doesn't it? Well, I mean, number one, it doesn't sound very nice because you can't buy anything in countries that have only interest-free loans and credit cards, because who in their right mind would provide such things, right? Interest actually happens to be, I'm writing something about this now, biblical takes on interest. Interest happens to be a rather crucial part of the financial markets. But she's tweeted worse things about Sharia law. She's tweeted with regard to women's driving in Saudi Arabia, for example. She was asked about, well, if Sharia law is so great, why can't women drive in Saudi Arabia? And here's what she tweeted. Right? She tweeted 10 weeks of paid maternity leave in Saudi Arabia. Yes, paid. And you're worrying about women driving? Puts us to shame. I mean, just ridiculous. Just ridiculous, right? I mean, she's defending Saudi Arabia because they have paid maternity leave. Well, maybe that's because women in Saudi Arabia aren't working very often. Okay, and not allowing them to drive is still a rather large problem. Okay, Saudi Arabia is not famous for its women's rights. She also happens to be a close associate of many groups that are associated with terrorism. Now, the speech that she actually gave, which she gave at the Islamic Society of North America, which has been linked to terror funding groups for years and years and years and years. And when it comes to terror incidents, she has a long and unpleasant history of saying ridiculous things about terror incidents. So, for example, here's what she said about the underwear bomber. You remember the guy who tried to put a bomb in his underwear and then bomb a plane coming into Detroit on Christmas Day during the Bush administration. She said, underwear bomber was CIA all along. Why did I already know that? Shame on us, scaring the American people. Okay, the underwear bomber was not CIA gang. He was a radical Muslim who was attempting to bomb an American plane. So this is who Linda Sarsour is. She's also posed next to people who are convicted of crimes in association with Hamas in photographs. She has bragged about having relatives in jail in Israel. She has tweeted out, I believe, photos of people getting ready to stone Israeli soldiers. She's a really egregious figure, and the left has embraced her. Now, what they've done now, is they've actually embraced her talking about jihad against the Trump administration. So yesterday, as we say, there was a headline that came out that Linda Sarsour, this Women's March organizer championed by the left, treated as just gold-plated wonder by Barack Obama and Bernie Sanders, that she said in a speech that she called for jihad against the Trump administration. Now, she did, I mean, those were her words. To pretend that jihad does not mean what jihad means is very silly. Jihad has many meanings, okay? Jihad can mean anything from an internal struggle for spirituality to actual violent war. And so when she called for jihad against the Trump administration, she gave some context to it, and we will play the context. But I wanted to give you the context of who she is, because I think there's a little bit more here than just, oh, she meant jihad like, oh, you should just say stuff about the Trump administration. I think that's disingenuous. So in order to understand what she said, you have to listen to a lot of the speech. It's 22 minutes long. We're not going to play the whole thing. We're going to play the crucial segments. She opened by thanking a guy named Siraj Wahhaj. Okay, here is her thanking a guy named Siraj Wahhaj. I'll explain why that's important in just a second.
In these United States of America, if you sit back idly in the face of injustice, if you maintain the current status quo that not only oppresses Muslims but oppresses black people inside our community and outside our community, undocumented people, other minority groups and oppressed groups, you, my dear sisters and brothers, are then aligned with the oppressor. If you as a Muslim are standing on the sidelines, if you are neutral in the face of oppression in this country, you are not a patriot. You are aiding and abetting the oppressors in these United States of America.
Okay, so it's not in that clip, but she did open by thanking this guy Siraj Wahhaj. This person, Siraj Wahhaj, is an actual terror supporter. I mean, he was listed as a possible unindicted co-conspirator in the 1993 World Trade Center bombings. He testified on behalf of the Blind Sheikh. He has a long history of speaking about jihad in the traditional way. Right, there's a direct quote from him, I think this is from 1992, quote, "I will never ever tell people don't be violent. That is not the Islamic way. The violence has to be selected." Okay, so when people hide behind jihad can be meant in a number of different ways. That's right. It can be meant in a number of different ways, and to pretend that it can't be meant in a number of different ways, or that when you use the word jihad it doesn't have certain connotations, is just ridiculous. So in that clip, you hear her talking what is basically typical leftism and putting it in the context of jihadism, right, or in the context of nonviolent jihadism, but rather Islamic resistance. It's kind of leftist resistance in an Islamic mask, right? If you sit back idly, then you are part of the oppressor, and you are not doing your duty as a Muslim. Okay, so that part is just typical lefty rhetoric. Here is the part that got all the headlines.
There was a man who once asked our beloved Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said to him, what is the best form of jihad or struggle? And our beloved Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam said to him, a word of truth in front of a tyrant ruler or leader. That is the best form of jihad. And I hope that when we stand up to those who oppress our communities, that Allah accepts from us that as a form of jihad, that we are struggling against tyrants and rulers, not only abroad in the Middle East or in the other side of the world, but here in these United States of America, where you have fascists and white supremacists and Islamophobes reigning in the White House.
Okay, so the word of the use jihad in this, the use of the word jihad in this context is disturbing. So she starts off by saying that what she means is a word of truth in front of a tyrant ruler or leader. That is the best form of jihad. But notice the language. The language is very specific here, right? She actually says, so I'm going to do a close read because the left keeps accusing people of taking this out of context. I'm giving you the entire context, okay? It's very important. She says there, I hope that when we stand up to those who oppress our communities, Allah accepts from us that as a form of jihad, that we are struggling against tyrants and rulers not only abroad in the Middle East or the other side of the world, but here in these United States of America, where you have fascists and white supremacists and Islamophobes reigning in the White House. So she is, number one, equating the Trump administration to, quote-unquote, tyrants and rulers abroad. I assume that this means Bashar Assad, right? I assume that this means, from her perspective, the Israelis. I assume that this means the Saudi government, or I guess she likes the Saudi government, so maybe the Iranian government. I don't know where she stands on these various Islamic supremacist countries. But the phrase that stuck out to me here is that she says, I hope that Allah accepts from us that as a form of jihad. A form of jihad. She's explicitly acknowledging in that phrase that there are many forms of jihad, and she is not disavowing all of the other forms of jihad. She's not saying the only form of decent jihad is speaking out against bad people. That's fine, right? No one cares about that. She's saying there are many forms of jihad, and I hope that Allah will accept this as one form of jihad. Okay, there's an implicit statement there that there are other forms of jihad that are legitimate. There is. Okay, there's no other way to read that intellectually, honestly. Now, she's not Yasser Arafat because she's not actively engaged in terrorism, but Yasser Arafat did the exact same thing in 1992. During the Oslo Accords, he went out, he talked to crowds about jihad, the Israeli government protested, and he said, no, I don't mean jihad. I mean, like an internal struggle, like speaking words of truth. So I'm not saying that Sarsour is actively supporting terrorism, but I am saying she is using verbiage that is specifically designed to be vague. Okay, she is using the word jihad advisedly here. And the left has no leg to stand on when they pretend that she is totally non-associated with terror support. Again, she started the speech by thanking a guy who has significant terror ties. The Islamic Society of North America has significant ties to funding of terrorist organizations, and has for 20 odd years. Okay, she in the speech she recommends CARE, which was another unindicted co-conspirator in the Holy Land Foundation trial funding terrorism. All of these organizations have serious questions to be asked about them, and she is a fundraiser for all of them, and she speaks out openly about Sharia law, and she pretends that terrorists are CIA plants, and the left defends her. And when the same left that was very upset in 2001, I don't know if you recall all the way back to 2001. In 2001, President Bush gave a speech in which he called for a crusade against Islamic terrorism, and the entire left went insane. How dare President Bush say this? How could President Bush do something so horrible as to mention the word crusade? Because it's just like the Crusades, when we fought against Islamic invaders, when the Western countries fought against, the Christian countries fought against Islamic invaders and pushed them back out of Jerusalem, and they were brutal and horrible. How could he use the language of religious war? Okay, they said that in 2001. The word crusade had been stripped of its religious meaning, essentially, for several hundred years by that point. Like when most people said crusade, they didn't mean religious conquest, right? Crusade was a lot less vague a word than jihad, right? Crusade was pretty secularly used, but people objected anyway. They said this was the language of religious war. Linda Sarsour gets up there and she uses the word jihad in a time when our legitimate enemies who are murdering Americans and Westerners around the world use the word jihad to justify their behavior. And she says that she hopes that her speaking against Trump is a form of jihad, is taken as a form of jihad, and we're supposed to pretend that this doesn't do anything, that this is perfectly legitimate, that she is a total advocate of nonviolence. Okay, she may not be advocating violence against the American government. She may not be advocating for, actual violent jihad against the American government, but she certainly isn't telling everybody around the world, hey guys, back off the violence. And she's certainly not quashing talk about how the American system of government is less tyrannical, that is just as tyrannical rather as all these other dictatorships and evil regimes that oppress, according to Linda Sarsour. So naturally the left comes out to her defense and they pretend that all of this is totally fine, and how could we be so upset about this? Why do we care if she uses the word jihad? Jihad just means struggle. Listen, Sarsour is not a dummy, okay? If she wanted to use the word struggle, she could use the word struggle. If she wanted to use the word resistance, which the entire left has used, she could use the word resistance. But to use jihad, which literally means holy war, in discussion about Trump is really troubling, and it should be troubling. If the left wants to make its program, for 2018, we are going to run on the program of we are angry at the use of the West in our civilization, but we are totally cool with somebody saying jihad against the Trump administration. Go for it, gang. I mean, if this is what Democrats want to do, enjoy. And I hope that you enjoy the flaming defeat that you experienced in 2018. It really is not good for the country. I'm glad that Democrats are exposing who they are every day, that the left exposes what it is every day. It is amazing. When we covered this and we said that she called for jihad against the Trump administration, the left immediately said, oh, that's inaccurate. It's not inaccurate. She did, okay? We didn't say that jihad meant that she was calling for terrorism.